Welcome to Syndicate Soul Stories. Hey everyone, please tell us where you're watching from in the comments and turn on all notifications so you never miss a single story. If you have not yet watched part 1, I want to encourage you, go back and start there first. Because what you are about to witness is the reckoning. And reckonings only land with their full weight when you understand exactly what preceded them. When you understand the woman, you understand why this moment matters. For those who are ready, welcome back. Let us finish this story together. The sound of the slap had not yet finished echoing through the marble corridor of Hale department store when the atmosphere shifted. It was not a gradual change. It was not the slow darkening of a winter afternoon or the quiet dimming of a light that has been dying for some time. It was instantaneous, the way a match thrown into a room full of invisible gas produces not a flame but an explosion. Total. Complete. Absolute. Every person in that corridor felt it before they understood it. The shoppers who had been frozen in their collective horror now found themselves doing something deeply instinctive, something animal. They stepped back. Not one step. Several. A wide, unspoken retreat from the epicenter of something they could not yet name but could already feel pressing against their chests like cold iron. Choi Sung-Jin had not yet spoken a single word. He stood in the entrance of the corridor, his two bodyguards flanking him at precisely the distance they had been trained to maintain, close enough to respond to anything, far enough not to crowd the man they served. His charcoal Italian suit caught the chandelier light the way armor catches sunlight in the moments before battle. His hands were at his sides, completely still. His jaw was set. His face was a study in absolute composure. But his eyes were on Amara. Only Amara. She stood 3 meters ahead of him, her hand raised slowly to her cheek, not dramatically, not in the theatrical way of a woman performing her pain for an audience, but quietly. A private gesture. The gesture of a woman reminding herself that what had just happened was real. That the sting against her skin was real. That she was real, and still standing, despite everything that had just been done to her. Sung-Jin had seen Amara Cole in many conditions. He had seen her exhausted at 3 a.m, poring over acquisition reports she had no obligation to review. He had seen her composed in boardrooms full of men who spoke over her and beneath her simultaneously, as though her intelligence was an inconvenient presence they had not prepared for. He had seen her laugh, a rare thing, like the first clear light after a long storm, on the evenings she permitted herself to be something other than impenetrable. He had never, in 2 years, seen her hand raised to her own cheek. He had never needed to. The temperature of Choi Sung-Jin's interior world dropped several degrees. Not in the way of panic. Not in the way of grief that floods a person and makes them irrational. In the way of a man who has made a decision so final, so irrevocable, that it requires no emotion, only execution. His eyes moved, for the first time, from Amara to the man standing before her. Kim Jae-Won, who had once been Amara Cole's husband, who had signed divorce papers across a table from her 3 years ago with the casual confidence of a man discarding something that had served its purpose and was no longer required, who had walked out of that conference room without once looking back at the woman he was leaving behind, as though she were a room he had already forgotten. Who was now standing in a luxury department store corridor in Seoul, his raised hand lowering slowly, so slowly, as though even his arm understood the magnitude of what it had just done. His designer shopping bags hanging limply from his fingers, the color draining from his face so completely and so rapidly that he appeared, in that moment, to be turning not pale but translucent. Sung-Jin began to walk. He did not rush. He did not stride with dramatic purpose. He simply walked, the unhurried, measured movement of a man who knows with absolute certainty that the destination is not going anywhere, because the destination is far too afraid to move. The corridor seemed to lengthen around him. Or perhaps it only felt that way because every eye was tracking him, and the distance between where he had been standing and where Jae-Won stood was being swallowed, step by quiet step, by something that felt less like a man walking and more like something inevitable arriving. He stopped 2 feet from Jae-Won. He was taller than him. Not enormously, perhaps 8 centimeters. But in that particular moment, the difference felt geological. One's expensive suit, his silk pocket square, his shopping bags, the beautiful woman who had been at his arm and who had, at some point in the preceding 60 seconds, quietly relocated herself several meters away, all of it shrank. All of it became irrelevant furniture in a room that had been rearranged by a single, breathing presence. Sung-Jin still had not spoken. He regarded Jae-Won the way a surgeon regards a complication, clinically, completely, with total professional detachment and not a flicker of personal effect visible on the surface. And then, softly, in a voice that did not need elevation because the entire corridor had gone absolutely silent in order to receive it, Choi Sung-Jin said, "You touched her." 3 words. No inflection. No accusation rising at the end. No performance of outrage. Just a statement, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man reading aloud from a document that has already been signed and sealed and cannot be unmade. Jae-Won's mouth opened. She was my. She is not yours. The interruption was not sharp. It was not the cutting edge of a blade. It was simply final. The way a door being closed quietly in an empty house is more definitive than a door being slammed. More permanent. More absolute. She has not been yours for 3 years, Sung-Jin continued. And even when she was, he paused. A single, deliberate breath, like the pause between a judge reading a verdict and pronouncing its consequence. Even then, you never deserved her. Amara Cole had not always been the kind of woman that men like Choi Sung-Jin noticed. Or rather, she had always been precisely that woman. She had simply not yet known it herself. She had grown up in Baltimore, the youngest of 4 children in a household that ran on pride and prayer and very little else. Her mother cleaned corporate offices on the night shift and came home before sunrise smelling of industrial cleaner and a tiredness so deep and so structural it had become architectural, built permanently into her shoulders, into the forward lean of her walk, into the way she lowered herself into chairs at the end of a shift as though she was setting down something extraordinarily heavy. Not just her body. Everything. Her father had been a man of enormous warmth and ordinary means. A man who had believed, with the unshakable conviction of the devoutly faithful, that education was the only inheritance worth leaving to a child. That everything else, money, connections, status, could be taken. But what lived inside a person's mind was theirs absolutely and forever, and no circumstance on earth could repossess it. Amara had listened. She had studied with the focused, sustained intensity of someone who understands on a cellular level that there is no safety net below her, that the floor of her life is exactly the height of her own effort and nothing more. Nothing else is coming. No inheritance. No rescue. No luck large enough to compensate for the absence of excellence. She had won scholarships that other students barely knew existed. She had graduated at the top of cohorts that expected less of her and received the full weight of her capacity instead. She had built a career in international finance with the kind of quiet, sustained, undramatic excellence that does not make headlines or generate social media spectacle, but builds fortresses. Quietly. Brick by brick. Year by year. And then she had met Kim Jae-Won. She had been 28. He had been charming in the particular way of men who have learned early and thoroughly that charm is a deployable currency, that applied at the right moment, in the right quantity, with the right degree of apparent sincerity, it purchases almost anything. He had been handsome, attentive, in the beginning, in the precise way that a spider is attentive to the vibration of its web. Every movement deliberate, every gesture calibrated. She had married him at 29. By 31, she had understood her mistake. Not with the clean, merciful clarity of a sudden revelation, but slowly, the way a flood enters a house. First one room, then another still. Until you are standing on the upper floor, looking down at water that has covered everything familiar, and understanding that the ground floor has been uninhabitable for some time and you simply had not permitted yourself to fully acknowledge it. Jae-Won had not been violent. He had been something arguably more corrosive. He had been dismissive. Consistently, precisely, expertly dismissive. He had treated her intelligence like an amusing inconvenience. Her professional achievements like accessories he had graciously permitted her to wear, provided they did not overshadow him in the rooms that mattered to him. Her ambition like a phase, a charming but temporary rebellion against what he believed to be the natural, inevitable gravity of her eventual domestication. He had not raised his hand to her during 2 years of marriage. He had simply made her smaller. Word by word. Silence by silence. Subtle correction by subtle correction. Until there had been mornings when she looked into mirrors and experienced a startling difficulty locating herself in her own reflection, as though the woman she had built so carefully, so deliberately over so many years, had been slowly moved out of her own life and replaced by someone quieter, someone dimmer, someone who had learned to take up less space as a form of self-preservation. The divorce had been her resurrection. It had not felt that way at the time. At the time, it had felt like failure, the specific, gendered, culturally weighted failure of a woman who could not hold a marriage together, who had somehow not been sufficient, who was starting over at 31 with a career but no family and a very particular species of loneliness that has no polite name and does not respond well to comfort. She had taken a contract position in Seoul 18 months after the divorce. She had not chosen Seoul for any romantic reason. No healing journey. No cinematic reinvention narrative. She had chosen it because the opportunity was exceptional and because it was far enough from Baltimore. Far enough from the version of herself that Jae-Won's marriage had constructed. Far enough from the mirror of her own perceived inadequacy. Seoul had not cured her loneliness. But Seoul had introduced her to Choi Sung-Jin. She had not known who he was, the first time. That was the detail Sung-Jin would return to, privately, in the quiet of his own memory, with something that was not quite amusement but lived in the same neighborhood. She had not known who he was, and so she had spoken to him the way she spoke to everyone. Directly. Without calibration. Without the particular micro-adjustments that people make instinctively, unconsciously, the moment they understand they are addressing a man of significant consequence in the world. She had simply spoken to him. It had been a finance conference in the central business district of Seoul, one of those vast, expensive, choreographed affairs with marble lobbies and lanyards with names on them and hundreds of men in suits moving between panels with the purposeful energy of people performing the theater of importance. The kind of event where the actual decisions happen in the margins. In elevator conversations, in the brief silences beside coffee stations, in the loaded glances across rooms that people mistake for coincidence. Amara had been standing beside a floor-to-ceiling window, the Seoul skyline arranged behind her like a painting she had not yet had time to properly look at. She had been reviewing a projected financial figure on her tablet. Her brow was drawn. The figure in front of her did not reconcile with the source data she had spent that morning reviewing, and the discrepancy was not small enough to dismiss. "The variance is in the currency hedge calculation," said a voice beside her. She had looked up. He had been standing at a natural distance, not intrusively close, his own conference program in hand. He was looking at her tablet screen, not at her, with the mild, composed interest of someone who has noticed an error the way a musician notices a wrong note in a familiar piece. His expression contained no performance, no attempt to impress. He had simply observed something and stated it. "Excuse me," she had said. "The figure you're frowning at," he said. "The discrepancy. It's in the currency hedge calculation. Whoever prepared this deck applied a Q3 rate to Q4 projections. 6.2% variance. That's your gap." She had looked back at the screen. She had run the math. He had been correct. She had looked back at him. He was watching her with an expression that was entirely patient, The composure of a person who is comfortable with silence in a way that most people are not. Not waiting for praise. Not waiting for her to be impressed. Simply waiting, because he had said the thing that needed saying and was content to let it land however it landed. You read fast, she had said finally. I've been standing here for approximately 4 minutes watching you frown at that figure, he had replied, with no inflection that could be interpreted as mockery. I was curious about what was holding your attention so completely. She had felt something, in that moment, that she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten it was a feeling at all. She had felt seen. Not the performative, strategic seeing of a man who wants something and is deploying attention as a mechanism toward an end. The actual, undiluted, specific attention of someone who notices the particulars of you, not your surface, not the image you project, but the precise, detailed thing your mind is doing and why. She had introduced herself. He had introduced himself. She had not placed the name immediately. It was only later, when a colleague had gone slightly pale upon learning she had spent 20 minutes beside a window in conversation with Choi Sung-Jin, that she had understood the full geography of who he was. What he represented. What his presence in any room in Seoul actually meant. By then, he had already asked to continue the conversation at dinner. By then, she had already said yes. Their courtship, if it could be called by so ordinary a name, resembled nothing that Amara had imagined love might look like the second time. She had imagined the second time would be armored, deliberate, slow-moving and defended. She had imagined she would test the ground beneath every step before committing any real weight, because she understood now, with the lived precision of a woman who had felt ground give way before, exactly what it cost to fall. Sung-Jin had not been accommodating. Not because he was impatient. He was, in almost every other dimension of his existence, a man of extraordinary patience. In business, in conflict, in the long game of decisions that compound over years, he was without rival in his capacity to wait. But he had identified, with the same quiet accuracy he applied to everything that mattered, precisely what Amara Cole was. What she represented. What she was capable of becoming in an environment that deserved her. And he had decided, with the unhurried, private finality that characterized all of his important choices, that he was unwilling to participate in a slow process of convincing her she was worth choosing. He simply chose her. Not dramatically. Not with the grand public declarations that embarrass both people and perform love for an audience rather than offering it to a person. With consistency. With the specific, unvarying quality of attention that does not require optimal conditions, that does not diminish when she was brilliant in a way that drew rooms toward her, or when she was exhausted, or when she was afraid and unwilling to name the fear, or when she was difficult in the particular way of a woman who has learned to lead with intelligence because warmth was weaponized against her. He told her once, on a quiet evening on the 43rd floor of his apartment with Seoul arranged below them like a circuit board for a city that never fully sleeps, that he had spent the majority of his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. "What do you want from me?" she had asked. It was the question she had been carrying for months. The one she had been waiting to have enough courage to ask out loud, because some questions, once asked, cannot be unasked, and some answers change the shape of things permanently. He had been quiet for a moment, long enough that she had begun, internally, to prepare herself for an answer she did not want to hear. To ready the particular armor a person assembles when they know disappointment is incoming and they want to meet it standing. "I want to watch you become what you already are," he said finally. "I don't think you've been able to see it clearly yet. I would like to be present when you do." She had not cried. Amara Cole did not cry easily. It was not a refusal, it was architecture, the way she was built. But something in her chest had rearranged itself in that moment, quietly and permanently, like a room that has been lived in wrong side up finally turned to face the light. And she had known, in the particular way that certainty arrives not as a thunderclap but as the slow, steady illumination of a dawn that has been building for hours, that she was not leaving Seoul. She was not leaving him. The proposal had come 9 months later. No audience. No performance. No photographer positioned in the corner of a restaurant. No friends hiding behind pillars. A single ring on a white tablecloth, matte black, titanium, extraordinary in its restraint. Her favorite meal already ordered exactly as she had it every time they came to this particular place, and Sung-Jin watching her from across the table with the composure of a man who is completely and utterly certain about one thing in a life full of variables that require constant management. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. 3 months later, on a cold Seoul evening with a guest list of exactly 22 people, no cameras, no press coverage, no announcement to the networks of industry that would have buzzed with the news for weeks, Amara Cole became the wife of Choi Sung-Jin, the queen of the most powerful syndicate in the Korean underworld. Not because she had sought power, not because she had strategically positioned herself in proximity to it, not because she had known, entering that first dinner, the full dimensions of the world she would eventually be entering. She had become who she was in that moment because she was already, in every way that mattered, already a queen, a woman who had survived the specific cruelty of being made small by someone who should have made her large, and had emerged from it with every essential thing still intact. She had simply been waiting, without knowing it, for a kingdom that deserved her. Back in the marble corridor of Hale department store, the silence had stretched far past comfortable. Jae-Won's companion had, at some imprecise point in the preceding minutes, made the very reasonable decision to remove herself from the vicinity of whatever was unfolding. She was somewhere behind him. Jae-Won did not know exactly where, because he had not been able to redirect his attention from Choi Sung-Jin long enough to track her departure. He had heard of Choi Sung-Jin. Every person of any meaningful standing in Seoul's business world had heard of Choi Sung-Jin. The name appeared in rooms where it was not supposed to appear, in private dining clubs, in the back channels of banking circles that prided themselves on discretion, in the lowered voices of men who would never in public acknowledge that the world Sung-Jin inhabited existed at all, but who privately understood that it was the architecture beneath the architecture. The frame beneath the painting. The thing that held the visible world in its current shape. The stories that circulated about him were not the kind of stories that made a person feel comfortable. "She was my wife," Jae-Won said. His voice was working extremely hard to project something that resembled confidence. It was not succeeding in the effort. The words arrived slightly compressed, the compression of a chest that is doing more work than usual just to keep breathing at a normal rate. "I didn't know she was." "I know you didn't know," Sung-Jin said. And something shifted, briefly and minimally, in the architecture of his expression. Not warmth, exactly. Something cooler. The specific contempt of a man who has calculated the full weight of another person's ignorance and found it somehow worse than malice. That is the only reason this conversation is still occurring. Jae-Won swallowed. "You raised your hand to my wife," Sung-Jin continued. His tone had not altered. Not 1 degree warmer. Not 1 degree colder. Absolutely level. In public. In a corridor she entered freely, troubling no one, costing you nothing. You saw her standing there, a woman who did nothing to you today, who owes you nothing, who has owed you nothing for 3 years, and you decided, in the space of whatever passed for deliberation in that moment, he paused, the way a blade pauses at the apex of its arc before descending, that she was still yours to humiliate. He took 1 step forward. 1 step. Measured. Deliberate. Not threatening in the way of a man who needs to close distance in order to be dangerous. Threatening in the way of a man for whom distance is simply a variable with no particular bearing on the outcome. "She was never yours to humiliate," he said. "She was yours to protect. To honor. To value with the full weight of what she actually is." His voice remained soft. It would have been easier if it had not been soft. If he had shouted. Shouting could be contextualized, managed, recovered from. This quiet precision, had nowhere to go. And you had no idea what you had. Jae-Won opened his mouth. Closed it. The arithmetic was visible on his face, the frantic internal calculation of a man trying to determine whether apology or explanation or complete silence represented the least catastrophic available path through this moment. He chose silence. Sung-Jin looked at him for a long beat. Looked at him with the complete, unhurried attention of someone reading a document that tells him everything he needed to know. "I want you to do something for me," Sung-Jin said. "I want you to remember this moment specifically. The way you feel right now, the weight in your chest, the precise quality of what is moving through you as you stand in this corridor, another beat, that feeling is what you made her feel. Not once. Routinely. For 2 years. With words instead of a hand. With silence instead of a slap. With the slow, patient work of making a remarkable woman believe she was ordinary." The words arrived without drama. They did not need drama. They were already the heaviest things in the room. "You are going to leave this store," Sung-Jin said. "You are going to return to your life. And you are going to reflect, privately, on the quality of the man you have chosen to be. And you are never, under any circumstance, in any city, in any context, going to be in the same room as my wife again." He did not say, "or else." He did not need to. The "or else" was present and understood by every person who remained in that corridor, embedded in the specific quality of stillness that surrounded Choi Sung-Jin the way gravity surrounds a planet. Not aggressive. Not declared. Simply inescapable. Simply the nature of the thing itself. Kim Jae-Won, who had once walked out of a conference room without looking back at the woman he was leaving, picked up his shopping bags. Turned. He left. He did not look back this time either. But the reason was entirely different. When Sung-Jin turned back to Amara, the architecture of his face had changed completely. It was not a performance. Amara had spent 2 years learning his face with the fluency of someone who has committed to understanding a language in its entirety, not just its most common words. Performance did not survive long in her presence. She was too attentive for it. Too precise. What she saw was genuine. The composed authority, the absolute stillness he wore in the world like a second skin, had given way, in the private space between them, to something nakedly real. Concern and fury and love, existing simultaneously in the same expression, the way weather systems collide. The specific alchemy of a person who has witnessed someone they love being harmed and has spent the preceding minutes suppressing every instinct in order to address the cause, and who is only now, in the aftermath, allowing themselves to actually feel what the moment cost them. He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps. His hand came up, slowly, with deliberate care, and rested against her cheek. The cheek that had been struck. His touch was so light it barely registered as pressure. The gesture of a man who understands that tenderness, at the right moment, is not softness. It is precision. She let him. She did not often let people touch her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice in this register, in the private register he reserved for her alone, was different from the voice he presented to the world. Quieter. Warmer. The voice of a man who had learned, over 2 years, the specific vocabulary of one woman's interior landscape and spoke it without accent. "I am not hurt," she said. He knew her well enough to understand the distinction immediately. She was not hurt in the way of physical pain requiring attention. She was hurt in the older, deeper way, the reopened wound way, that comes from being reminded, suddenly and without warning and in a public space, of a chapter you had believed was fully closed. Of a version of yourself you had deliberately left behind. Of the specific, humiliating weight of being treated as though you are still someone's possession long after you have reclaimed your own name. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't slap me," she said. Precise as always. Accurate as always. "No," he said. "But I was not here when it happened. And I am sorry for that." She looked at him. At this man who ran an empire with the clinical efficiency of a general and who looked at her, only at her, always at her, like she was the only permanent, immovable thing in a world full of things that shifted and changed and could not be trusted to remain. "I didn't need you to be here," she said. And this was not pride. It was the truth, stated plainly. "I was handling it." The pause. "I know," he said. "I know you were." And this specific acknowledgement, this precise, unembellished recognition, this deliberate refusal to reframe himself as the rescuer in a moment where she had been wronged but had not been powerless, this was the thing. The whole thing. The reason she had said yes before he finished the sentence. The reason she had stayed. He did not need her to have needed him in order to feel like a man worth anything. He simply needed her to know that he was there. She lowered his hand from her cheek, held it for a moment in both of hers, a rare, quiet gesture, there and then gone. Then released it, straightened her coat, looked around the corridor with the composed, measuring gaze of a woman returning to herself after a brief, unwilled absence. The shoppers who remained had rearranged themselves into the ordinary business of the store, making their way past displays, murmuring to companions, returning to the comfortable fiction that the last 15 minutes had been something they had merely glanced at rather than witnessed fully. The corridor breathed again. The chandeliers blazed above, indifferent and beautiful, casting gold across white marble that had seen far more extraordinary things than this and would see many more. "I still need to make my purchase," Amara said. The corner of Sung-Jin's mouth moved. The fractional, barely there shift that people who knew him recognized as the fullest expression of genuine warmth his public face allowed. "Then we'll make your purchase," he said. And together, the queen of the syndicate and the king who had simply been standing in the right place at the right moment to recognize royalty when he saw it, they walked deeper into the store. The crowd, without instruction, parted. The chandeliers blazed. And the marble corridor of Hale department store, which had witnessed a woman struck not 30 minutes prior, which had absorbed the sound of a palm against skin and the collective horror of bystanders who did not know what to do with what they were seeing, now witnessed something entirely different. It witnessed a woman who had once been made small, deliberately and over time, by someone who should have known better, walking through the world at her full, undiminished height. Her shoulders were back. Her chin was level. Her hand, the one that had briefly touched her own cheek, was at her side. Still, unbothered. And beside her walked a man who had never once asked her to be smaller so that he could feel larger, who had done, from the very beginning, the rarest and most extraordinary thing a person can do for another person. He had simply pointed at what she already was and waited for her to see it too. It was, by any honest measure, a beautiful thing. Thank you for watching till the very end. You are truly the best, and this story would mean nothing without you here to receive it. If Amara's journey moved something in you today, if this story spoke something into your spirit, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth, and subscribe for more Syndicate Soul Stories. We have so much more coming, and you do not want to miss a single chapter. Until next time, stay strong, stay rooted, and always remember, the people who underestimate you are simply writing the opening chapter of your greatest comeback story.